More now on the deadly standoff in Ohio after police say a man armed with an AR-15 style weapon tried to enter the FBI's Cincinnati field office. On social media, accounts bearing the man's name include politically violent posts encouraging people to go to gun and pawn shops to, quote, get whatever you need to be ready for combat. With us now, CNN senior law enforcement analyst and former deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, and Phil Mudd is back with us as well. Andy, I just want to start with you. And again, we're still learning more about what happened in Ohio, but there are these possible links to everything else that has happened this week. Your view?
John, it's just such an incredibly potent example of the state of the threat in this country right now and how easily that threat of political violence can be accessed by Donald Trump and directed by him. And I think that's what we saw yesterday. Assuming the investigation bears out that this individual's motive was in fact to attack the FBI, he made statements immediately following, began these statements immediately following the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago on Monday. So, you know, this is what counterterrorism experts and observers and folks like myself have been talking about for months. Donald Trump has an amazing amount of influence over people who harbor these sorts of beliefs. When he baselessly floats out an allegation, as he did on Monday, about the FBI possibly planting evidence in his residence, which we all know there's been absolutely zero proof produced for that, he knows that that can have an incredibly inspiring effect on people who harbor these extreme beliefs and compel them to move to take violent action. It is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and Phil, he's not the only one, right? I mean, all of this gets amplified. You hear people who support him, elected officials, the kind of rhetoric that they're using. What are your concerns? What's your message to Republicans who are, as they complain about the weaponization of the DOJ and the FBI, are in a way weaponizing that rhetoric?
My message is professional and intensely personal. And the professional piece, let me focus on radicalization. Whether you're dealing with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, during the days of Islamic terrorism, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, you needed radicalizers. That is, if an individual wants to commit an act of violence, often there's someone they respect. In the case of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's typically on YouTube or in a chat room who will validate that person's feeling. You're 18, you're 20, you're 25, you're 30, you're angry about America. I'm telling you, as a respected figure, you can use violence. We are seeing that kind of thinking transition from the fringe to a core movement in America, among American conservatives, that is far-right conservatives, telling people that it may be appropriate to use violence for political purposes. So this is about radicalization that you would see in a lot of terrorist circumstances that I've witnessed. Let me close quickly on a personal note. Last night, this morning, I woke up to having received the most vicious piece of personal hate mail I have received in years. It appears from my reading of this hate mail that it results from someone who's radicalized by what they saw us say, including me, in response to what happened in Mar-a-Lago, and what that person is seeing their political leaders say. If you think this isn't significant in America, it is across our country, and it is comprehensive, Brianna. When people tell someone to be radicalized, people will radicalize.
Did this note threaten your life, Phil?
I get a lot of hate mail. This is borderline criminal referral. I will not refer it, but this individual told me I need to be smacked around and that I'm the scum of the earth. I will not get into the additional pieces of this. I get this kind of stuff pretty regularly, but this is more significant than what I've received in a while. And again, first question was whether it goes to police. It won't, because it doesn't have some specifics I look for, but man, this is emblematic of what we have in this country, John.
And Andy, how much risk in this environment do you feel that FBI personnel and other law enforcement personnel are this week?
Well, John, I mean, there's no question that the work environment for FBI people has been getting tougher and tougher over the last 5 or 6 years, right? So Trump has been basically at war with the FBI since we opened a case on his campaign in July of 2016. That has a corrosive effect on the ability of FBI agents and professional support staff to develop the sort of trust that they need to get their job done. Now we've gone one giant step further than that. You have people like this person from Cincinnati yesterday online talking about actively targeting FBI agents as they conduct their work in the field, as they're out in all of our communities talking to victims, talking to witnesses. You've got thousands of FBI people out across the country every single day doing this vital and important work. And now to know that there may be a core element of extremists really anywhere in the country targeting them is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And could I just add to address Brianna's question, my question for our political leadership of both sides is, where are you? It's bad enough that their own rhetoric is pushing some of these extremists in that direction. They should be out actively trying to tamp this down. They should be making statements about responsibility, about true patriotism. No matter how they feel about whatever investigation they're fired up about, there is absolutely no excuse for this sort of provocation to violence, and they should all be out trying to tamp this down.
Andy McCabe, Phil Mudd, our thanks to both of you for the work that you do.
Joining us now is Aria Kovler, political consultant, and Joan Donovan, the research director at Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Joan, you hear this story that we're talking about here out of Ohio. Do you see this as a one-off, or do you see this as part of a broader radicalization that you see dots connected to the rhetoric that you're studying?
Yeah, so there's a few things going on here, I think, in social media that we have to address. One of them has to do centrally with the way in which people are posting online, encouraging one another. There's a lot of overt calls to violence, just like you addressed. And what we've seen over the years is when violent rhetoric isn't taken down and content isn't moderated, that we see this wires to the weeds effect, where people will eventually commit those violent acts. And we've seen it with message boards such as Stormfront, where neo-Nazis used to gather, or still do. And now we have to start looking much more deeply into Truth Social. I think if there is a bright side to this, this doesn't seem to be organized in the same way that we've seen other kinds of violence like January 6th. And so in a sense, Schiffer is by no means a lone wolf, but this wasn't an organized attack. It doesn't seem to be that there's evidence that he was part of a militia or other groups at this stage. And so we do have to look much deeper at the data in this case. But unfortunately, many of the signs that we've seen before where someone posts about a violent activity and then carries it out seem to track with sites that have a lack of sincere content moderation.
Very, very important point that you're seeing that trend. Aria, you've seen the tone shift, right, with the rhetoric since Trump left office. Can you tell us how?
Well, while Trump was in office, most of the talk inside, I guess you'd have to call it MAGA world, the part of online extremism that was supportive of Trump, was essentially pro-government in its orientation. Trump was the government, they supported him. And they, while there was suspicion of the FBI and certain other authorities, and there was always a sense that, essentially, as long as Trump was in charge, things would be okay. Obviously, after January 6th and after the inauguration when Joe Biden became president, there has been a shift, and we're seeing the reemergence of perhaps a more classical right-wing anti-government extremism in the discourse. And whether that is around COVID measures, which has been the dominant form of right-wing anti-government extremism for the last year and a half or so. But now COVID measures have kind of largely gone. That energy is being poured into other areas. And one of the things that we're seeing in particular was the Mar-a-Lago search as being a trigger. Another one, oddly enough, and these two are very much conflated in the last week and a half in the right, is the plans to increase funding for the IRS. And if you are in the kind of far-right media right now, you'll see those two things being spoken about as if they're the same thing, as if this is all a plan of the federal government to clamp down on people like us, Trump first, and then I guess all of his supporters.